Welcome to the debate. When you watch a master illusionist perform a sleight of hand, there is this profound illusion of absolute simplicity, right? Like a coin vanishes, a card appears out of thin air. It just looks entirely effortless.
Exactly. Yeah. You sit there in the audience seeing this, pristine final result, but you are completely blind to the mechanics behind it.
Right.
You don't see the decades of rigorous practice or the precise joint movements in the fingers or, the deliberate psychological misdirection.
And we experience that exact same illusion every single day. Not on a stage, obviously, but every time we cast our eyes over a page of text. If you ask most people what reading is, they'll tell you they simply look at words and, instantly understand them.
Which is a lovely thought, but it's completely wrong.
Exactly. The brain tells a highly complex, almost magical story of its own. It is arguably one of the most remarkable neurocognitive achievements in human learning.
It really is, especially when you stop to consider the evolutionary biology of it. Unlike spoken language, which, we are biologically hardwired to acquire, the human brain did not evolve specifically for reading. We just haven't been reading long enough as a species.
There's no original dedicated reading center in the brain.
Right. We essentially had to use evolutionary duct tape. The brain has to hack itself. It repurposes existing neural systems, areas originally designed for object recognition and spoken language, to transform visual symbols into meaning. And it executes this neurological gymnastics routine in, milliseconds.
Which brings us to the core of our discussion today. We are drawing from the latest material in Neuro-ELT, that is, the application of neuroscience to English language teaching.
Anchored by Stanislas Dehaene's landmark theoretical work, Reading in the Brain.
Yes, exactly. We are looking at this repurposed neurocognitive architecture and asking a fundamental question. When we look at how the brain reads, and crucially why some learners struggle to read, what is the primary neurocognitive bottleneck?
It really is the ultimate diagnostic question. Are we looking at a visual traffic jam or a systemic network failure?
Spot on. And my position on this is clear. The critical foundation of reading is rapid, automatic processing in the visual gateway of the brain, what we call bottom-up processing.
Okay.
Without this instantaneous visual recognition, the brain's working memory is immediately overloaded, and reading inherently fails. The sheer physical speed of the visual system sets the absolute speed limit for everything else in the brain.
And my perspective is that visual recognition is absolutely insufficient on its own. True reading efficiency is dictated by top-down integration.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning how seamlessly the brain connects those visual symbols to a complex pre-existing network of meaning, pronunciation, and background knowledge. You cannot reduce the miracle of reading to merely a visual scanning exercise.
Okay, well, let's unpack the mechanics of that visual scanner first, because I think once we understand the hardware, my perspective becomes pretty hard to argue with. We have to start with the discovery of the visual word form area, or the VWFA.
The brain's customized letterbox.
Precisely. For those trying to visualize this, it's a highly specialized region located in the left occipitotemporal cortex. Basically, if you reach around to the back of your head, slightly tucked behind your left ear, you're in the right neighborhood.
Yeah, it's a fascinating bit of real estate.
It is. The brain has literally rewired this specific patch of neurons to act as a dedicated recognition system for written language. When a skilled reader encounters a familiar word, this region doesn't just see shapes.
Right. It detects the orthography.
Exactly. It detects orthographic information, the specific letter patterns and spelling, in literal milliseconds. And it does this completely beneath our conscious awareness. The brain has begun processing the word before you even consciously register you are looking at text.
I don't disagree with the biology of the VWFA. It is a marvel. I grant you that.
But here is why I argue it's the single most critical component. It operates in a strict physical time frame. If this visual gateway is not functioning at absolute peak automaticity, every single downstream process in the brain is delayed.
Delayed, sure, but
The semantic networks can't guess what the word is if the visual data isn't cleanly and rapidly extracted. It is the fundamental prerequisite.
it's a prerequisite, sure, but recognition alone is simply not reading. The VWFA doesn't understand anything.
Well, no, of course not.
It has no idea what a word means. Its role is strictly pattern recognition. The actual act of reading, the whole reason we do it, focuses on what happens next, which is lexical access.
Meaning the retrieval of the word's actual identity?
Exactly. It's the immediate linking of a written word to its pronunciation, its meaning, its grammatical rules, and, your previous knowledge about it. Reading fundamentally emerges from multiple systems interacting simultaneously.
Okay, but now, further down the line, you have incredibly skilled workers. These represent your semantic networks, your language processing systems, your deep background knowledge.
Right?
But if that initial scanner is processing items one piece at a time, or if the belt is lagging, the entire downstream assembly line halts. It absolutely does not matter how efficient or how knowledgeable or how prepared those higher-level brain systems are.
But the brain isn't a factory floor.
Let me finish. If the scanner doesn't feed them visual data at a highly automatic rate, the factory shuts down. That separation of duties is exactly why visual efficiency must come first. It is the physical bottleneck of the factory.
I understand the logic there, but let me tell you why the factory assembly line analogy kind of falls apart when we look at the actual neuroscience. It treats the brain as a linear, one-way conveyor belt. You scan the word, you pass it down, you attach meaning, you move on. But that contradicts the very essence of how a neural network functions.
How so? I mean, the eyes hit the page first. That's just a physical reality.
The eyes hit the page, yes, but the network doesn't wait for a finished product from the visual cortex. Let's look at the example provided in the Dehaene material, reading the word teacher.
Okay.
When a skilled reader sees that word, the brain doesn't just run a structural scan of the letters T-E-H-C-H-E-R and slowly pass it down the line for approval. In fractions of a second, the brain simultaneously activates phonological information, the sound of the word, alongside the semantic information, identifying it as a person who educates.
Right.
And concurrently, it fires up related concepts like school, learning, and classroom. It's all happening at once.
But wait, they only fire after the visual cortex recognizes the orthography.
Not entirely. The higher-level networks are actually reaching down, in a sense, anticipating and actively aiding the visual system based on context. The brain is a predictive engine. It isn't just passively receiving visual data. It's actively guessing what's coming next based on meaning.
But if we assume there is a strict order of operations, the occipitotemporal cortex still has to verify that visual data. If the VWFA does not securely and instantly identify that specific letter sequence, the semantic network triggers the wrong associations. Or, worse, it triggers none at all.
But you can't isolate the semantic network as if it's just like sitting in the break room waiting for a package to arrive from the visual cortex. Reading is the rapid, messy coordination of these systems.
Sure, but
The attention system directs cognitive resources based on meaning. If you only have a highly efficient visual scanner, but a weak semantic network, you aren't reading. You are just word calling. You're pronouncing sounds without comprehending the message.
look, if we're talking about a perfectly healthy, fluent reader, I grant you that the systems feel simultaneous. But let's look at what happens when this neurocognitive architecture breaks down.
Okay, fair point. Let's look at struggling readers.
If you're listening to this and you've ever traveled abroad and tried to read a menu in a foreign language you barely know, you've experienced exactly what I'm talking about. You stare at the words, you sound out the letters one by one, and by the time you reach the end of the sentence, you've completely forgotten how it started.
Right. Yeah. That's a classic working memory failure.
Exactly. And the research explicitly shows that reading difficulties are rarely about a lack of effort. The challenge lies fundamentally in processing efficiency. When word recognition is slow, struggling readers process words piecemeal. They sound out every letter, every syllable.
It's exhausting.
It is. It's like using up 90% of your computer's RAM just to load the font on a web page. There's no computing power left to actually load the images of the video.
That's a really great way to put it.
Right? So, if a learner's cognitive resources are entirely consumed by the mechanical act of decoding symbols, their working memory becomes overloaded. Doesn't that prove my point? Higher-order semantic networks, all that beautiful meaning and context you're talking about, are completely inaccessible until visual automaticity is achieved.
Not necessarily.
If decoding eats all the RAM, comprehension fundamentally cannot happen.
It proves that working memory is a finite resource. Absolutely. I completely acknowledge the cognitive exhaustion you're describing. When cognitive resources are consumed by decoding, reading becomes grueling. But you are ignoring why that decoding is so exhausting in the first place.
Because the visual word form area hasn't been trained to automaticity yet.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that predictive engine I mentioned earlier. Think of the semantic network, like the autocomplete function on a search engine.
The autocomplete function? Okay.
Yeah. If you open a search engine and type TEA, the algorithm instantly predicts teacher based on context, past searches, and relevance. It does the heavy lifting so you don't have to type every single letter.
Right.
The brain does exactly that neurologically. If a learner lacks vocabulary depth or hasn't activated relevant background knowledge, their brain doesn't have an autocomplete function. Meaning and context literally reduce the cognitive load of decoding.
I'm struggling to see how meaning physically reduces the load of a strictly visual orthographic process, though. The visual processing system identifies specific curves and lines that make up letters. It doesn't care if the word is teacher or a completely made-up nonsense word like blarg. It just processes the visual data it receives.
But it does care, because the context physically lowers the activation threshold for the neurons in the visual cortex.
Wait, really?
Yes, when you are reading a paragraph about a classroom, your semantic network has already primed the orthographic and phonological representations for words like teacher, student, and desk. Those specific neural pathways are warmed up.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Therefore, the eyes need fewer milliseconds of visual data to confirm the word. The cognitive exhaustion you were talking about happens precisely because the struggling reader doesn't have a robust lexical network supporting the visual gateway. The visual system is working entirely alone, from scratch, on every single word. That is why it overloads working memory.
I see the logic of the autocomplete analogy, but you're assuming the student has successfully decoded enough of the surrounding text to establish that contextual priming in the first place.
Well, sure.
If the visual gateway is fundamentally clunky, they don't even know they are reading about a classroom. They're stuck on the very first word of the sentence.
But
fluent readers recognize words automatically, which leaves working memory entirely free to maintain the narrative across sentences and paragraphs. When a struggling reader processes a word piece by piece, that is a bottom-up visual processing deficit. The working memory system can only maintain the thread of a story if the visual processing system is feeding it effortlessly.
But you cannot decouple the visual processing system from the working memory system. They are mutually dependent. It's a network deficit, not just a visual one.
Okay, let's ground this in reality then. Because if we take all this high-level cognitive science, what on earth is an English language teacher supposed to do with a struggling student on Monday morning?
Right.
This neurocognitive reality has profound implications for neuro-ELT.
It absolutely shapes the entire pedagogical approach.
Right. And if we accept the premise that cognitive resources are completely hijacked by decoding when recognition is slow, then the structural need for teaching is glaringly obvious. Instruction must prioritize accuracy and speed of visual recognition above all else initially.
Above all else? I don't know about that.
Yes, above all else. We must teach through repeated exposure to vocabulary and strategic reading practice designed strictly to develop automatic word recognition. The primary goal of a reading intervention has to clearing that visual bottleneck through relentless decoding practice until the VVEL-FR responds instantly.
But if you look at the neuro-ELT principles drawn from the research, they actively push back against that highly isolated approach. Yes, accuracy is important, but they also explicitly call for efficiency of processing. You cannot just relentlessly drill the visual cortex with flashcards and expect a fluent reader to emerge.
But if they can't decode the flashcard automatically, they can't read the text.
True, but effective reading instruction must simultaneously include the activation of background knowledge. It must focus on vocabulary depth. You cannot build true processing efficiency simply by drilling visual symbols. The brain must be taught to access meaning efficiently.
But
That requires building deep, interconnected vocabulary networks, not just training fast eyes.
fast eyes, as you put it, are the only mechanism that allows the brain to access meaning at all. If we don't relentlessly build that automatic word recognition, the student will always be trapped in that state of cognitive exhaustion.
I just think that's a really reductive way to look at it.
Yes, the ultimate goal is helping the brain access meaning, but the pathway to meaning is entirely paved by visual automaticity. If a teacher spends 45 minutes activating background knowledge about a topic, but the student still processes the word teacher one agonizing letter at a time, that background knowledge is practically useless. The working memory will still crash.
And I would argue that if a student can rapidly decode the letters TEACHER in a millisecond, but has incredibly shallow semantic connections to what that word implies in a specific cultural or grammatical context, they haven't actually read anything.
Well,
They've just performed a biological party trick, a visual to phonological translation.
I'm not suggesting meaning is irrelevant. I am suggesting a strict hierarchy of cognitive operations. You have to build the hardware infrastructure before you can run the software. By ensuring repeated, targeted exposure to orthographic patterns, we build a robust visual word form area. We physically change the brain to clear the decoding bottleneck.
Right.
Once the bottleneck is cleared, the working memory is freed up, and the semantic network finally has the bandwidth to do the beautiful, complex work of meaning construction.
And I look at the neuroscience and see a house being built simultaneously from multiple angles. The semantic network actually helps construct that hardware infrastructure.
By lowering the threshold, like you said.
Exactly. In Hebbian learning, we know that neurons that fire together wire together. Every time a teacher introduces a word with deep contextual meaning, backed by rich background knowledge, they are actively strengthening the brain's ability to visually recognize that word the next time. The neural pathways between the visual cortex and the language processing centers become thicker, faster, and more insulated when meaning is attached. It is a completely reciprocal relationship. Drilling shapes without deep meaning creates word callers, not readers.
This is exactly why this debate is so central to cognitive science. My position remains rooted in the sheer biomechanics of the brain's reading gateway. We are dealing with a brain that did not evolve to read, forcing it to repurpose neural systems.
All right.
Because of this, the visual decoding process is inherently unnatural and must be rigorously trained to a level of extreme automaticity. Preventing working memory overload via rapid visual decoding has to be the absolute priority. If the scanner is slow, the entire neurocognitive factory simply shuts down.
And my position remains that reading is a vast, interconnected orchestration. It relies on the visual processing system, the language processing system, the semantic network, working memory, and the attention system operating in constant, dynamic harmony.
A symphony.
A symphony.
The visual gateway is vital, yes, but meaning construction is just as critical to reading efficiency as visual recognition. The brain is a predictive engine. It doesn't merely identify letters, it anticipates them by activating phonological, semantic, and conceptual information simultaneously. Isolating the visual system completely ignores the reality of lexical access and how context actively reduces the cognitive burden of decoding.
Well, despite our friction on what constitutes the primary bottleneck, I think we have reached several vital points of convergence here. We both fundamentally agree on the core neurocognitive reality reading is not merely looking at text. It is a staggering cognitive achievement.
Absolutely. It's easy to take it for granted, but every single sentence we read activates a remarkably complex neural network. Every paragraph we process reflects thousands of coordinated cognitive operations. It is a symphony of neural activity happening in literal milliseconds.
And we also agree on the ultimate pedagogical takeaway for educators. The key question in the classroom is no longer simply, can my students read the words out loud?
Right. The better, much more profound question is, how efficiently can their brains transform those written symbols into meaning?
That neurocognitive question has to be the guiding light for how we approach language teaching, how we design interventions, and how we support struggling learners.
There is clearly so much more to explore here, particularly in diving deeper into Stanislas Dehaene's research and examining how these complex neuro-ELT implications play out when applied to different writing systems around the world. We'll leave it to you, our listeners, to reflect on the evidence. Is visual automaticity the ultimate speed limit of the brain, or is semantic network integration the true engine of reading comprehension?
It really makes you look at a printed page entirely differently, doesn't it?
It certainly does. We started by talking about the master illusionist, that profound illusion of absolute simplicity when a trick is performed perfectly. The next time you effortlessly scan a sentence or quickly read a text message, take a moment to appreciate the thousands of neural operations, the visual scanning, the memory retrieval, and the semantic web building happening completely under your conscious radar.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
The magic isn't an illusion at all. It's just the neurocognitive architecture of your own brain at work.